Hello, everybody. Happy New Year's if you have made it here to on this very day. I'm recording this video on the last day of December of 2024, and in that time, I've read a total of 9 books. That doesn't sound like a lot for someone who has been trying and writing their first book, but I'd say it is really good progress knowing I've only read about 2 to 3 books each and every year. At the start of 2024, I wanted to set a journey of reading one book per month. That obviously didn't work out so well, but I'd still want to talk about that journey in itself because I've had a ton of fun reading. And currently getting through this book now, both the one I'm writing and the one I'm reading, I'd say it's a good time to have a sort of a checkpoint of sorts to see how far I've come along. And maybe this might be the video you need to simply just enjoy reading as a whole because this journey put me back on reading in a way that I've never felt more like a kid. Like I felt like I was back being 10 years old in a way that I haven't felt since going to a park or just playing soccer. Now, the way I ordered these books was the order in which I read them throughout the year, but because I've stacked them in a really awkward manner, this is going by most recent to the first book I've read. It would be fun to go in chronological order, but here I am. I'm simply just going to go through each of these books in order. Nothing too particular with this review. Here to just spread some ideas and just get the ball rolling. So, the most recent book I've read in all of 2024 because, again, books take forever to read. They approximate around 2 to 3 weeks at most, at least in my experience of reading. So when it comes to these books, I wouldn't suggest to just speed read through them all, but simply just take it all in. This isn't a way to shamelessly plug these books in and whatnot. It's just what I personally find appealing. And if you want to find any of these books, just Barnes & Noble is a really good place to find them all. That's why I got all of these books. So without further ado, here's to the first book of this order, aka the most recent one. Arnel Arcega is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I've never had so much fun reading through a woman's perspective. And that's so crazy to me because I mostly read through a lot of the Harry Potter series or the Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, 1984, in which we follow a male lead predominantly. But for a book I've read throughout October through November, it's been one of the most fun and endearing books I've had in a while. I absolutely love the character of Arnel Arcega, and even with her struggles in mind, I felt really bad for her towards the tail end of the story. Final pages really set in this strong pace I've never seen in such a book that you don't get as much in movies, but with a book like this, you can tell its story so wonderfully as a writer or hell, even just an audience. You can see it all unfold and imagine all the details. And I like that. The little moments here, like one of my favorite moments is when she and the main dude, I've kind of forgotten their names, but that's okay. When they were going out for lunch as per usual and that she saw a baby, and I thought that was a really sweet moment. There's many of those here, and with the final act of this book taking a surprisingly dark turn, it is an insanely fun read. All of these, just remember this is just a spoiler-free review. But I'm still here to express my thoughts on the story in general because there's so much little details with this and all the novels here that even if chosen just by the cover, because really I just love the artwork and just the simplicity of the cover. Even if they say don't judge a book by its cover, sometimes that's the biggest key. One of my all-time favorite books, actually, called The Book Thief. It's a huge classic that I think many of you have heard. I've heard of that only because of both the title and the cover, intriguing me in a way that I never did. And what do I know? It's in my top 3 favorite books of all time. Now, Arnel Arcega isn't one that I would see rising up to those classics. It's a simple story, yet it does its job so wonderfully. I'm like, who the hell cares? Amazing read, and I'd say that for a final book to end with, even if I had more books in line, I'd say it's a really strong ending that you couldn't get more appreciative of. Following that, how about instead of a simple book, we go 500 pages. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a story that, hot take, I might argue is better than the current Hunger Games trilogy. Scratch what I said about Eleanor Oliphant, but yes, you follow Katniss's story throughout all of the Hunger Games, and yet there's something without comparison. There's something so intricate about Snow's character that makes this by far my favorite entry in the series. Of course, it's long. It's 500 pages, and with so much detail split into three parts, it's a lot. I remember reading reviews about how a lot of people really don't like the games aspect of this novel, but I mean, it's one of those where I adored it mainly because I love counting just the death order, as messed up as that is. With a story like The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it's the only one I counted out of all of these to really have some sort of adaptation. And yes, everyone says the book is better, but to its credit, I really enjoy the movie. I think one of the strongest benefits I gotta give this book is just the ambiguity of the ending. Like, if you've seen the movie, you'd understand what I mean. You wouldn't understand what I mean. But with this book, it takes such a fascinating turn that makes Snow's character such a fun one. And with its cover in mind, I'm glad to read through it. It has an awesome texture to it, and for 500 pages, I got through this surprisingly fast. An amazing September read, and let's just keep going back in time into August. Oh, would you look at that? It's a classic. Catcher in the Rye is as popular as it gets. I mean, it's a fine book. It's like the dark side of the moon of book opinions. Like, it's good, but like, I don't care. See, what I love about books is that they capture a different kind of feeling than movies or music. You spend days reading on, or even if not just days, like multiple hours just reading and finishing a story. I think Catcher in the Rye is one of those cases where I don't know how to describe it, but I don't enjoy the story as thoroughly as I could have. Mainly because it's a story that permeates for its time. Like, I get it. Sometimes things are timeless, but for 1951, this is really overrated. Holden Caulfield is a solid main character, but even as a up and coming teen myself, I just don't enjoy the way he's told as much. And the blatant just use of damn gets on my nerves. But with all that said, I'd say it's still a great novel. It uses its pace wonderfully, and the middle part where he's at his lowest, as messed up as it is my favorite part of the story. The ending is fine, the whole story is fine. It's a classic, but like 1984, it's one of those where people say it is, then you read it, and then you become John Lennon's killer. Now that I read Catcher in the Rye in August, we're going even further back in time to June because I kind of skipped July, as terrible as that is. Lazy City is once again another book similar to Eleanor Oliphant, taking place in the UK. We follow, instead of a woman in her 20s, it's a woman in her 30s. And it's a weird love triangle thing going on, but my favorite aspect about this book is, without question, the religious part. As an author, you can tell any kind of story you want. And one of my favorite aspects about those kind of stories is just the simple kinds of messages you want. And I'd say Rachel Connolly here did an amazing job presenting the God aspect, especially with the backbone theme of the main character's friend being gone and her mom being as terrible as she is. Similar to Eleanor Oliphant, not trying to compare as much, but I really enjoyed what they did with the characters they crammed in and using the little kids involved to sort of emphasize the innocent aspect of the story present. It's not too much of a story, but I'm glad to sit through it nonetheless. Yes, May time. It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne de Marken. I don't even consider this a book at all. It's a strange set of poems written about an apocalyptic world in which the main character's head gets cut off. Yes, I said it's a spoiler-free review, but it still happens. Now, even though I've went on about these stories and how at least solid they are, because it's hard to compare stories with a sort of numeric rating, knowing how books aren't the same as like movies or music, how fast you can consume that. I still say this is the easiest 9 out of 10 I've ever given a novel in a really long time. it's just a strong read that you don't get often in the modern age, and being written in 2023 or so, it's a fun time that for how messed up things happen, it's pretty sick. I don't know. I just have a ton of great memories reading this story, and I'm glad to discuss it here, and just simply just go on about the beauty of reading and how fun it is, even if it's not on the same caliber as certain things you could be passionate about, whether it's like something like reading, like music or movies, or something greater like business or spiritual stuff. It's a great novel that uses a lot of English words phenomenally, and not to sound pretentious or anything, but just everything about this is just great. The cover, the characters, it's short, it's sweet, and it lasts forever and then it's over. What more could you say? April, The Alchemist. A pretty solid story set and told by a Latin American. And I say it's one of those stories where even though I don't understand the culture behind it, I'm glad to empathize with the whole traditional fantasy aspect here. Like, it's been a while since I've looked through these pages, but I recall just the powers, I guess the elements, you call it, the elements used towards the end of the story. And it's one of those strongest experiences that you don't get much of in these kind of old fairy tale novels. That's the best way to describe it. It feels like a fairy tale in which it doesn't get me contemplating life as much, but it's just a fun time that with it with me getting this 25th anniversary edition, I don't hate it at all these books I say were made by solid, talented people, and if you're watching this kind of video, then you'd probably be up there, similar to me. Not even just as an author, but just a creator or whatever you want to do in this time. For mostly young men specifically out there, like myself, I am happy to sit through this novel, and I'm glad to just feel that story aspect of a young guy striving for the best, even if it costs so much time and energy. As much as The Alchemist didn't move me as much, I'm just gonna jump straight to it. Osamu Dazai's No Longer Human is my favorite novel I've read probably this whole year, and ranks right behind The Book Thief in like my top favorites. We could put it number 3 as like 1984. I think No Longer Human is just an amazing read that even if it's been months since then, God, it's been like over 9 months since March. I'm happy to say that this book, without question, taught me just how one line can change your whole perspective on a certain situation. Now, usually I said spoiler free, but for this one instance, I want to get into spoilers here. At the end of the novel, the main character is put into a psychiatric hospital, right? He's this guy in Japan and going through such rough times, mostly with his wife cheating on him and him wanting to just off himself. But even with that in mind, he goes through such an amazing art, not even amazing art, but just an amazing, weirdly like downward spiral that ends up with him stuck in that psychiatric hospital with all his relatives looking after him, worried, what you can call a family at least. And to me, what got me like reading this whole story and watching this man grow up from a kid into this guy is finding out that at the end he was only 20 something. You could lose your mind at 20 in your 20s, and you wouldn't even know it because you've just gone so far down. That's really just the message of it. With the story being told in like this journal aspect, where a man years later found these journals written sometime before World War II, it's one of those spectacular moments that, for such a simple cover, the one I have, I can't help but just tear up just a little bit, even as a guy myself. It really taught me what it is to be human, as weird as that is to say. And I'm just happy to sit through this. It's a beautiful experience that set this tone right and this book journey in a way that I don't see often in novels and stuff. God, I'm getting teary eyed just thinking about it. All right, two more. Mitch albums, The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. This one referenced John Lennon. Now, that's two books that reference John Lennon. Um, the thing about the Magic Strings of Frankie Presto is, compared to No Longer Human, we follow a man's entire story from start to finish. We see his birth and we see how he dies. That was all in the first page, by the way, so I don't care about the spoiler-free mark. But what I will say for those who are interested in this kind of story is, because it's written by the same person who made Tuesdays with Maury, I'm genuinely impressed just how well he tells this story, following this fictional pop star in the 1950s and 60s, evolving into someone that deserves all the love he gets. Like, Frankie Presto himself in the story may not be a perfect man, but he's pretty decent, even if his achievements are played up. And the fantasy aspect isn't one that I'm too in love with, but I'm glad to sit through it anyways because it's a phenomenal read from start to finish. I love the music aspect, and coming from a guitarist who's been practicing for 5 years now, I'd say it delivers 100%. I'm glad to sit through this, and for what it's worth, if you're a musician, this is the book I'd jump straight to next. As we just sat through February's read, one last book. Nick Hornby's High Fidelity. The book that started it all. I knew reading the first few pages, I would be in here for the long run. There's something so intimate about the details found in this story, with how much care they put into the main character's life, showing how depressing it is after his woman left him, and now chasing this American woman while still dealing with the woman of his own. There's something touching about that, even if I haven't experienced it myself. Once again, it's a simple story set in London that I'd say does a really nice job at just showcasing what it takes to be a creative of some kind. Like, the book isn't perfect. I only got it mainly because of the weirdly sick the weirdly sick book cover. But as it is, written for the 90s, I'd say it's another great novel, only because it references the Beatles for a third time. But ignoring that, I really enjoyed what I was given here and all the pages I sat through and thoroughly looked at. It has an ending that lasts a little too long, not forever, but just 100 pages more than I wished it was. But even with that in mind, I empathize why the story kept on going as it did, just to showcase the fallout of what you can call the climax, because it's a relatively short and simple story until something huge happens in the second act that I'd say really left me surprised, to say the least. All around, it's a great novel that serves to be a really solid read overall. Now that I've sat through 9 books I've read this year, it's easy to say my favorite is No Longer Human, but I will say It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over is my second favorite, and right behind it, I'll give The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. It's a grower that once again showed me just how intimate the human life can be. I know it may sound pretentious just hearing from the voice of a kid, more or less, about what he's read throughout the whole year, but I hope this inspired someone out there knowing that books can enjoy and be read through something. It's loving in a way. And so long as it's not too degenerate, because I will be honest, quite a bit of these books do cover topics that just really gross me out. I hate it. I don't care, man. Sometimes that's what a book takes. It's a beautiful experience that you take weeks to finish, all just to sit through. And even if it's just one book, I'd say there's something of value here. Now, of all these 9 books, the one I'd recommend the single most, I think that captures everything I wanted to come across, is without question, and strangely enough, The Alchemist. I don't know why, but even though The Alchemist section is the one I covered the least, it's the one I'm genuinely surprised by. And to note, you can find this most at it's the book I see the most occurring in all these places, so it's not that hard to find. The thing about all these books is they're all fiction novels, and as an author, you really have to decide if you want to be a non-fiction or a fiction writer. I want to try covering my bases in both, but if I had to choose, it's fiction all the way. Mainly because you can tell such a medium there, but you can still create some sort of business even if it doesn't cover the best amount of money. And as a whole, I think this idea of writing novels is such a genius idea that I'm glad still exists in the modern day. Oh, okay, my bad. Yeah, I guess all the books just fell. But in conclusion, if you enjoyed this read and just everything that I've told, and maybe inspired you with how this all came together. And I hope you have a good rest of the year and just generally have a good time. Take care.